welcome back. This is Mornings with Joe Catenacci on the Big Talker 106.7 FM. Keeping with the North Carolina Hour, I'm very excited here to have on the program Professor Mike Munger. Mike Munger is Professor of Political Science and Director of the PP&E program at Duke University. But more important, he is on the program today, and we wanted to get him on to discuss his run for the North Carolina State House in District 34. He brings a lot of very interesting ideas that are near and dear to this program and to everything that's on this station. So there we go. I guess Professor Munger, how are you doing today?
I am very well. Thank you so much for having me on the show.
Now, when I went over to your website and started learning about your candidacy a lot more, and I hope a lot of the listeners know that you did also run for governor of North Carolina in 2008, put together 121,000 votes for the highest vote total, I believe, of any gubernatorial libertarian in the country, which is huge. When I went over to the website, I saw three major issues, and all of these, I think, sang to my heart. Number one, choice in education. Number two, more consumer choice by ending the state monopoly on the alcohol system, and zoning and housing. Tell us about education first off. What does that sort of mean for choice in education? And if you were to be elected, what would that mean in the state house?
One of the difficulties that I've always had with North Carolina's education system is that wealthy people have choices now. So taxes go into a pot, and wealthy people can buy their way out of the state monopoly education system. Now, I'm a fan of state schools. I think that, like in Sweden and Germany, having a state school system that works well is a big advantage to citizens. The problem is the monopoly part of it. And in fact, in North Carolina, it's not the only choice that people have, but it is the only choice that poor people have. So the advantage of a voucher system means that people get to use the money that would be used to educate their child, and those parents get to decide how best at the local level, given the knowledge that they have of their own child and the knowledge they have of the local alternatives, they can decide where to send their kid. The two advantages of this is that it returns responsibility back to the parents who are in the best position to make educational decisions for their children, but it takes the financing part and leaves it with the state. So I think the sweet spot is to have competitive provision, but state assistance in financing for education, because I find the arguments that equality of opportunity in education are pretty important. I think that that's something that most libertarians are going to agree with. The question is how to accomplish it. Sending everyone to monopoly state schools, which have the disadvantage that in poor neighborhoods, they're just not nearly the same quality, that guarantees inequality of opportunity. So the state system is the one that gives us inequality of opportunity. Having school vouchers for the poor brings us closer. It may not achieve it, but it brings us closer to the ideal of equality of educational opportunity.
And would this be very similar to things that have been practiced in places like Pennsylvania, these opportunity scholarships that allow lower-income people to benefit from this sort of tax-free education scholarship system? Is that something that you would hope to implement in North Carolina, or at least push in the State House?
I don't know the details of what would be politically possible. There's a couple of models. I guess my favorite one is, because the tax-free ones work well for people that have enough income to make the fact that it's tax-free an advantage. My concern is that for the very poorest people, they don't have enough income to make that all that attractive. Wisconsin has used something they call backpack vouchers. And what that meant was that the money goes with the child. And so as a result, if you send your child to a public school, the public school gets the money. And in a lot of places, public schools are the only alternative. What would happen is that with a backpack voucher, there would now be the possibility that other kinds of schools, maybe they're charter schools, maybe they're private schools, could also open up. So I'm looking for something that's quite flexible. But the advantage of the tax-free benefit that Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Georgia, some other states have used is that there are models for actually approaching it. So I can see an argument for that, because in that case, we could learn from the experience of other states.
We're speaking with Mike Munger. You can go to his website, Munger4, the number 4, NC34.org. There you'll see some of the priorities that he has listed out in his run for North Carolina State House number 34. Point number 2 on here, very near and dear to my heart, everything with consumer choice and alcohol laws. Now, tell me there, Professor Munger, what are the problem with North Carolina's alcohol laws today, and what do you propose as a solution for the future?
North Carolina has a truly remarkable system. It's unique. There's no other state that's like it. So what North Carolina did, there were some changes in the 1930s and then some changes in the 1980s. What North Carolina did was create a system of, in effect, local licensing and state control. But the state system, the Alcoholic Beverage Control, or ABC system, there's 170, and remember, there's only 100 counties in North Carolina. There's 170 different local boards. There's one county that has 9 separate elected officials. And these are not 9 elected officials. These are 9 separate elected boards to decide what alcoholic beverage control in that location will look like. Now, many of these boards operate exactly one store. So what that means is you have quite a bit of revenue that's coming into this system, which is then given to local political cronies. And you can see why, in a way, for the local parties, it's pretty popular. The average pay for the board in counties in North Carolina is $250,000. That is, the county board chair of the ABC system makes $250,000. Now, the governor makes $140,000, I think. So all of these local county boards, very highly paid jobs, next to nothing to do. They do employ 3 or 4 other people, and then there's the workers who work at the ABC store. So the offenders that I've heard, what's interesting to me about the ABC system is everything that I think is a cost, they see as a benefit. So I say, look, you've got all these people on the payroll making, in many cases, a large amount of money. And they say, yeah, isn't that great? It's a jobs program. And I say, well, it's really inefficient. A lot of people have to drive really far and then pay high prices for alcohol. And they say, yeah, isn't that great? That means that it's very difficult to acquire alcohol. We want low consumption, and having high prices and inconvenience like that, that's really what we're looking for. So there's really a fundamental disagreement about this. We don't disagree about facts. There's a bunch of people who work for this system that wouldn't work in a more efficient system if we had grocery stores or even private package stores selling alcohol. People would have to drive a much shorter distance. In some cases, the nearest ABC store is 30, 40, 50 miles away in some of these rural counties. There's no reason that you couldn't have a local package store or sell it at the CVS. And also the fact that the prices are high and that North Carolina collects not just tax revenue, but inefficiency wages. You might call this an inefficiency tax, that our prices, maybe they're not that much higher than other states that also have high taxes. But if you compare prices in North Carolina to the Midwestern states that sell alcohol in grocery stores, the total cost to consumers, which is the sum of the sticker price and the inconvenience cost, is half. So North Carolina is charging really high prices. We're paying a whole cadre of local officials who don't actually do anything. And the inconvenience to consumers, having to drive all that distance, and the consequence for the environment and exposure to danger driving at night, none of those things are necessary. There's no other state that has the North Carolina system. We are uniquely bad in this.
And if you were to be elected, you would be one of a handful of state legislators who are hammering on this topic. So that would be very interesting to see.
I think it might be possible to break through. There's actually one of the difficulties, I said, is that each county has at least, 98 of the counties have at least one, and then there's another whole bunch of these local boards. And consumers don't really care enough to organize, but all the people that work for the system, they're ready to go to war to preserve the existing system. So it's a classic political problem of large but diffuse cost and small but concentrated benefits.
Well, one would hope some of these people have taken economics courses, perhaps at your university, to learn a better way forward. Point number 3 on the website, that's munger4nc34.org. The last one is about housing affordability. Now, District 34, just north of Raleigh, huge area in terms of jobs, a lot of people moving there, a lot of California refugees, people coming from high-tax states. When it comes to housing affordability, you mentioned zoning. That's not necessarily what most people think about when they think about affording houses. They mostly say, hey, we need to have some kind of very affordable public housing. You know, why is this solution of zoning, why is that the bigger issue?
You know, I have to admit that this is the area in which I am most optimistic, because a lot of young progressives have come to recognize that the state here really is the primary problem. Usually the story is something about greedy landlords and they won't drop their price. But the two big problems that you will run into, even in Northwest Raleigh, which is where my district is, much less in San Francisco or, you know, large cities that have terrible problems with housing, the big problem that you have is, first, there's a minimum size and minimum set of requirements for what new housing has to have. And it's often 1,200, 1,500 square feet, which means that a new place that is, in effect, a 2-bedroom apartment, that's going to be way too expensive for poor people. The second thing is a zoning requirement that each of these units have at least 1.5 or 1.75 parking spaces. So not only do you have to build an oversized apartment compared to what many poor people would like, you also have to have a parking garage. Now, that's really difficult for poor people in an urban area who have to take buses. They don't have a car, but they have to pay as if they were paying for parking spaces. So I wrote a book not long ago called Tomorrow 3.0 about the new sharing economy, and I have been invited to give talks at a number of planning conferences. Now, these are urban planners. These are progressive to the core. Their idea is that cities should be planned and organized and regulated, and I get standing ovations when I say the main concern that we have to have is to get rid of these parking considerations. We have to not give free, and I'm making air quotes, which makes for great radio. We have to not give free parking to people who think it's their God-given right to park their car for free on a street. Well, that's not true. We have a lot of streets. We have a lot of space. We have a lot of impermeable area that's devoted to parking lots. If we stop requiring people who can't afford it to pay for those things, then we can have much more affordable housing. And like I said, the reason I'm optimistic is that urban planners and many young progressives recognize that that's really the core of the problem. The reason there's not enough affordable housing is that we can't afford to build new housing. So as you said, the usual solution is something like subsidies, or we'll have public housing. And if you look at the history of public housing, it's a catastrophe. What people want is to be able to live in integrated neighborhoods. And this actually goes back to schools. If you want integrated schools, you need integrated neighborhoods. And I don't mean just integrated by race. I mean integrated by income. So if poor people live in neighborhoods where wealthy people live also, then the financial class segregation of schools will be diminished. So for a number of reasons, it's really important that we create a system where it's possible to build what's being demanded. 1 bedroom, 800, 600 square foot apartments with no parking. If you could build that, you could make a lot of money. As if you're a builder or developer, that's a very profitable building if you have a lot of these small 1-bedroom apartments and no requirement for parking. But as it stands, it is impossible to have a profitable new 1,800 square foot apartment with 1.75 parking spaces and then rent that to poor people. It can't be done. We can do it if we just get rid of the zoning restrictions.
Mornings with Joe Catenacci here on the Big Talker 106.7 FM. We're speaking with Michael Munger. He's a candidate for the North Carolina State House in District 34, running under the Libertarian Party banner. And Professor Munger, you are not a novice in the political scene, but it is your first time campaigning for a state house seat. How's it going on the campaign trail? Do you got any kind of events planned, good outreach? You know, how's it looking when you're speaking to voters who might have to decide on your next job come November?
Well, I am very hopeful, but as you say, it's come November. I was unopposed in the primary, and so I've already won my first election, but it's because I was unopposed.
There you go.
Since the election's not until November, at this point, what I'm trying to do is talk to groups, but more listen to refine the three issues that we've talked about that I say I want to be the centerpiece of my campaign. The campaign will really kind of pick up in September and October, and I expect I'll do quite a bit of walking around the district and some more personal listening and knocking on doors, that kind of thing. But for now, what I'm trying to do is research an actual white paper, a proposal for how the reform of the ABC system might work. Because, as you said, many people have this sort of vague feeling, well, we could do better. What I would like to do is come up with proposals for all three of the issues that I've talked about so that, unlike my opponents, it's clear what I'm actually proposing to do if I'm elected. And I'm hoping that will give me some advantage.
Now, you don't hear that every day from someone running for office. Professor Mike Munger,
yes,
thank you.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.